Welcome, my name's Deirdre Nelson and I'm a textile artist. I normally work with community groups and artist residencies and also produce work for exhibition, mainly in embroidery and knit. I was trying to think of something to do, a nice activity maybe that we could do with something we've got lying around in the house. And I thought maybe of using or recycling woolen jumpers. I'm sure we've all put our jumpers too hot in the wash. So I'll show you some of the materials that might work for this activity today. Got a cashmere cardigan that is shrunk. It's worth looking at different parts of the jumper to see what you could make from it. I've also got a piece of knitting. It's quite chunky knitting that is felted in the wash. That might work well for making something else like a trivet or something to put your pot on in the kitchen. I've also got some felted tweed which would work really well for the activity. So feel free to stop and start the video at any time. And good luck, I hope you enjoy. The downside of sharing this activity in a film is that I can't be with you while you're making these gloves or slippers. So please do remember to take care with scissors, pins and needles. Thank you. What you'll need is some felted wool fabric, a pair of scissors, pins, a pen, needle with quite a big eye, some wool to stitch up, and some scrap paper. I've traced around my hand here and created a glove shape. I've added a little bit extra around the edges and that allows for a bit of room and seam allowance. I've also added a little bit extra along at the wrist so that we can get the hand into the glove. This can be used as a pattern to create oven gloves or maybe mitts. When cutting out, I actually cut down a little bit farther with the thumbs and cut off a little bit extra across the bottom, and this will allow for your hand to go inside. Before sewing up your mitt, you could add some decoration on the surface first. I'm just adding some little bits of tweed here that I've stitched around. And I've just been over stitching it. To keep it in place. You could add whatever colours you like and maybe use a contrasting thread. You could also stitch directly into the fabric if you'd like and create pattern. I'm just doing a simple running stitch here. It's important to do this before you stitch it up because it's harder to stitch inside once you've stitched around the edges here. We can overstitch the edge. Maybe you could use a brighter colour or a colour that coordinates in some way with your work. So we can do an overstitch like this, or we could also do what's called a blanket stitch. I'm sure you've seen this on the edge of old-fashioned blankets. So we've made an oven mitt using recycled blanket. and it makes a really nice thick fabric for the oven mitt. You may have jumpers lying around that you want to put in the washing machine and felt to use for the next stage. And I just thought I'd explain a little bit about how that works. So what you want to do is have a look at the labels of your jumpers and make sure that they're actually pure wool. This jumper's cashmere, this cardigan's cashmere, and the woolen blanket is pure wool. So that works the best. You want to put it in the washing machine at the hottest temperature, and make sure that you don't actually put it in with another jumper of a different colour, because the fibres will attach together. And you add a small amount of soap and put it through the wash cycle. And what actually happens is the fibres all mat together with the friction of the water and then the soap added as well, and that felts the fabric together. So you then could start to think about how you could use your jumper and think about what way you could cut it up to use different things. There's nice rib edges of some of the jumpers. This is part of a sleeve that I've actually taken off, and I thought maybe I could make something like a wrist warmer from this. I could cut it down the side and sew it up. But I'll leave it up to you. I know you'll come up with lots of good suggestions. You could keep the buttons. I saw a great thing once where basically if you have something like a mark or a mend on the jumper, there's a little bit of darning here. What you can actually do is take a piece of tape and put it over the darn, and then it means when you begin to cut it out and looking at a pattern, it'll stop you cutting all the way around here and actually realising then afterwards that you've got a darn or a hole in your jumper. The materials you'll need for making your slippers are some pins, a needle, pen, a ruler, some scrap paper, a pair of scissors, and some of your felted wool fabric. Draw around your foot as best you can to get a pattern. Or you could draw around a slipper or shoe to get the shape also. So I've traced around my foot or slipper, and before I cut it out, what I'm going to do is just create a straighter line just along the edge here. And this will just allow for a much roomier slipper. Now it's ready to cut out. So what I've done is I've marked my foot pattern with right and then turned it over and marked it with left for the right and left foot. And when we come to cut this out in fabric, this will become a little bit clearer. So now what we want to do is make the pattern for the top of the slipper. And what I've done is I've just found some scrap paper, an old paper bag. You could use anything, newspaper, whatever you've got lying around. And then what I need to do is measure 1 inch all the way around. And what this does is adds the extra room for your foot to go in the slipper. So I'm just going to do this with a little ruler, but you could do it by eye if you wanted. And then once we've done that all the way around, what you can then do is draw a line around. But when you get down to the bottom, if you can just go straight and then go straight across, and this will become a lot clearer when it comes to putting the top of the slipper on. I'm just going to do the rest of this freehand. So now we're ready to cut that out. So I've cut out the shape for the top of my slipper. And what I'm going to do first of all is fold this in half. And then I'm going to measure down roughly a third the slipper. I've got about 30 centimetres here, so I might do it maybe 11 centimetres down. Just a little bit over a third. And then what I'm going to do is come in roughly an inch or 2.5 centimetres across here, and I'll just draw a little line. And then join this up at the bottom. The next thing I can do is cut this out. So now I've got the shape for the top of the slipper. You could actually do a curve here if you like, or you could play about with the shapes of the top of the slipper. So I've pinned on my pattern piece and I've cut it out for the top part of the slipper. This felted blanket that I'm using had a bit of a stripe across the top of it, so that's actually worked out quite well for the top of the slipper. So now I'll just cut out the sole, making sure I've got the right and left pieces in the right place. This fabric cuts very easily because it's been felted, so it gives you a really nice edge, and it means also that you don't have to turn over the edges. You can just stitch straight over it. So I've got two pieces here. I might need to trim a little bit extra off here. Sometimes the cutting, you can have a look yourself at the edges and just see if anything needs a little trim. Maybe you haven't cut it correctly. I'll maybe trim a little bit off the edge here. So now I've got my two pieces. So what I normally do is put a little pin in the middle of the top. You could fold that over and just check where it is. And the same on the other one. And what I would also do is put the same at the bottom, and it just helps you line things up when you start to stitch. So I'm going to start stitching my slippers together, and I'd put a pin in the middle at the top. So I'm going to take that out and begin to stitch. I've got a knot in my thread, and I think what I'll do is put it on the inside of the slipper so that you don't see it on the other side. And I'm going to stitch an overcast stitch to hold it together. Now I'm using a contrasting colour, but you could use the same colour, or you could maybe use a nice bright colour or something that contrasts with your recycled wool. So I'll stitch all the way around until I get to the end. And then you'll see at the end you'll have some extra, so you can decide just how much to cut off at the end. And then I'll show you another one that I've done. And then what I've done is I've cut it off and then I've overstitched at the end at the back. And again, you could do that in a different colour. If you want to decorate your slipper, maybe it's best to decorate it before you do your stitching. So you might want to put an edging on, or you might want to put some decoration or even some embroidery on the surface. So maybe do that before you begin to stitch it up. So I hope you've enjoyed watching the film and you managed to come up with some great ideas for recycling your own woolen jumpers. Thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.